From Wall Street to Main Street to help small business owners have the same capital as corporate America and give them the same resources as a larger company. We cover business funding, business credit, scaling, business consulting, and much more. Check out the website at shieldadvisorygroup.com. Welcome to the show, The Liquid Lunch Project.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Liquid Lunch Project. I am Matthew R. Meehan alongside my partner, the Professor, Luigi Rosabianca. What's on tap today, Lou?
Matt, business is a constant state of evolution, and video killed the radio star, and podcast killed probably the video star. So it's a new medium, and anyone and everyone is doing podcasts, guesting on podcasts. So it's a wonderful medium to learn, share, and grow. So no better than Spencer Carpenter to explain to us the importance of this new medium and whether it's here to stay. Spencer Carpenter, welcome to the podcast, my friend.
Matt, Luigi, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, we're just going to start from the get-go. The podcast it's hot. Everyone's doing it. Is it here to stay?
I think so. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be different types of changes that come just like any type of medium. But what I think podcasting has turned into, at least for a lot of people in the business and investing space and entrepreneurship, is it takes the education that comes from audiobooks and pairs it with the long form conversation that came from Howard Stern, and then takes the convenience of streaming services. So you can listen to it when you want, you can learn, you can do it while doing chores or on your commute, whatever it might be. It allows people to do it when they want, learn the way they want, and be entertained while doing it. And so I think it's going to be here for a while.
I drove 3.5 hours yesterday and a couple days before that. All I did was listen to podcast after podcast. My daughter was in the car with me and the podcast went on and she's like, "Daddy, you don't listen to music?" I'm like, "Not really anymore. I'd rather learn something." So I think that's what's really cool about podcasting. And some are better than others, like anything else in life. But you know what? There's something about people having a conversation and it just rolling naturally, and you're not selling yourself, but people get to know, like, and trust you better from that aspect.
Well, that's one of the things I really talk to my clients about, is what I call the no pitch scenario. And the thing about podcast versus something like running ads for Facebook or Instagram is that people are volunteering to listen. So if you run ads on Facebook or Instagram, you are doing disruptive marketing. You need to grab their attention. First, you need to create the content. Then you need to grab their attention. You need to keep their attention. You need to get them to your website. You need to get them to convert or schedule a call or whatever it might be. And that whole time, nobody's super stoked about seeing ads. A lot of people are able to accept it. Some people don't care. I don't really like ads in any form for the most part. But it's also that this idea of being able to volunteer to go listen to someone talk for 25 or 45 minutes is something that these companies wish they could get people to do. Can you imagine any brand actually getting someone to come listen to them talk about their toilet paper for 45 minutes? I mean, obviously there's not much that you can talk about for 45 minutes with toilet paper, but they would love that opportunity if they could. And so what I really like about podcasts is that thing where people are volunteering, but then it's not like a sales pitch. The person that's a guest is supposed to be giving away information, and that allows for the listener to put their guard down. They're not feeling like they're being sold. And so back to the ad side of things, I also hate being sold. I could sign up for a consultation call and I'm still on guard about being sold. I don't want to be, I know someone's trying to convince me to put my money in their pocket, and that even if it's a product I want, I'm on guard about it. But with podcasts, because it's just a conversation that they're listening in on, they don't have to have their guard up about that. And so as a result, they can just listen, hear the person's personality, their passion, their background, and it's rapport building for 45 minutes. And then if at the end they decide they need the person's service or whatever it might be, they can reach out, and it's not even them being sold at that point. They're already sold. They just need to know how much. So I think that it's, especially for businesses and entrepreneurs and investors, this is just an incredible opportunity.
Spencer, why don't we lift the hood for the audience a little bit? Because nothing happens in a vacuum. And a lot of the audience may not be aware of the back end that comes with producing a podcast. There's the production, there's the distribution, there's locating the guests. Once it's produced, you have to distribute it, you have to promote it. So kind of walk us through the challenges that not only a podcast guest, but also a podcaster would have in promoting this new medium.
Yeah, I mean, the great thing about podcasts is that there's a low barrier to entry in creating the content. It's just you have to schedule someone and get that recorded, and again, it's just a conversation. It can be a formal interview. It can be, you could have a platform where you're just like, hey man, we're just going to talk for the next 45 minutes and see where it goes. It can be that informal as well. But, because it has a low barrier to entry, we're getting a lot of people that are, again, entrepreneurs. They're also busy with other things. Maybe they are a small business and they have a team to dedicate to it. But, it is important to make sure that you look at how other people are doing it. What is the software they're using? How much are they putting into editing? And to your point, distribution. The great thing about distribution is it's not like you have to go upload it to Spotify and iTunes and Stitcher and Apple Pie. Like, people don't understand. You'll upload it to one place and they put it everywhere. So there are these very simple things that everyone has to learn how to do to get the podcast out. But if you can learn how to do it, it's fantastic for your business and being able to create content. And then on the guest side, because the host is already putting in all that time, the guest doesn't have to if they don't want.
You sent us some amazing guests for our show, and we love your company for doing that, right? Because we had some really interesting conversations. But let's bring it back a little bit, Spencer. How did you get involved in the podcasting world?
Yeah, so I was in the music industry for 15 years. And, when I found podcasts and saw it was a great way to learn, I'd been driving a lot. I was always driving. I was listening to music. I kind of got sick of it. I'm like, let me use this as a way to listen to people that know more than me and learn. And it was actually me listening to things like Bigger Pockets, real estate podcasts, where there would be someone that's like, I didn't do really well in school. I've got nothing special that I really do, but I know how to flip a house and make $50,000. And I was like, well, I did do well in school and I've never even seen $50,000. And so this person has really valuable knowledge that I don't have. And I wish more people were hearing it. And so I recognize that unless you are Mark Cuban or Richard Branson, entrepreneurs and business professionals and investors are not looked at like talent. They are with their job. They might be renowned for their job, but they're not looked at as talent. And I just decided when COVID shut everything down and there were a bunch of people stuck inside, not being able to go to conferences and networking events and expos, that I was going to help them get out there and perform while they were stuck in their basement. And I saw podcasts as the medium to do that. It's not that podcasting is new and they hadn't heard about it. Just most people don't know how to go out and get on one, or they don't have the time to dedicate to that. And so I was like, let me just go help those people. I've got nothing else to do. My industry's shut down for the next 2 years.
So Spencer, you're at the gym for an hour. What do you listen to?
When I'm at the gym, I mainly listen to music because it's hard for me to focus on a heavy set while also trying to learn. But
I agree with that.
I listen, but I get excited. I'm like, yes, I get to go mow the lawn today. And I get to listen to this 2-hour podcast while I'm also doing gardening and stuff like that. I look forward now to washing the dishes because I have a podcast to catch up on. So that I'm listening to. I love listening to I like listening to the educational stuff that can be on something like Joe Rogan or Breaking Point's, a political podcast. I listen to a lot of investing podcasts like Bigger Pockets and stuff like that. And obviously, I listen to a lot of interviews that my clients do.
I find myself always having to do something while I'm listening to a podcast. I can't just sit there and listen to it. So I'm either driving or I'm cleaning my garage. It's something that you can learn while you're doing something else and kill two birds with one stone, so to speak.
Yeah, and if I was going to sit there and listen to a podcast, I would prefer the video option, something like a YouTube show or something like that. But when I'm busy, I don't want to have to look at something. And that's why it's great for outdoor work or chores or driving or whatever it might be.
COVID comes around, you're not doing anything, you get this great idea. What happens next? How did you put it into execution?
So it's funny because I'm really not someone that just jumps into something willy-nilly. I like to evaluate what it is that could go wrong, what it is I can deliver, and what I can't. And when I had this idea, I was immediately like, oh yeah, I can totally do that. It was just a matter of does anyone want to pay me to? And so I reached out to a few people, tried to build up some referrals right off the bat. And within a week, I had my first client that someone else sold. They just white labeled my service. And the first month and a half of this business was me just sitting down every single day for hours, cataloging thousands of podcasts. And it just, finding their websites, who the hosts were, their email contacts, and that sort of thing. And I knew at that point that, like, it doesn't matter how many emails I have to send. I will get 5 podcasts to say yes to this person. And that's just it. And obviously, as time has gone on, I have more relationships. I know how to pitch better. I know what makes a better pitch for my clients, what are more unique, topics that they can speak on. So it's gotten a lot easier. But that was really the start, was just like, I knew it was just a numbers game. I just needed to get out there, put my clients in front of people, and eventually there will be enough to say yes.
So you went to iTunes, you aggregated all the data, and I'm sure you segmented all the data, the different industries for what client you wanted. And then you said you had somebody white label it and sell it. So were you using that as like a joint venture or white labeled Salesforce? I know you're still doing that now.
Yeah, so I partnered up with some people that had marketing companies or publicity companies or something like that. And the thing about the podcasting space and why there's not many people that do what I do is that publicity companies and marketing companies are already busy with so many things. They were not prepared for this new medium that now has hundreds of thousands of options out on the market for them to be pitching to. And not just options, but those are relationships they have to put together. And so I remember my friends in the music industry asking their publicists during COVID, can you please get us some podcast interviews? We got nothing else to do. And in like 2 years, they got 2 interviews because the publicists were just not prepared to do that for all of their clients over and over. And so, I sometimes do work with people that have a publicity team, but, we don't step on each other's toes. So all that is to say that I do work with marketing companies and publicity companies that are already busy doing other things, and they want to upsell this product. And so, because they're usually working with business professionals or investors or entrepreneurs who I really resonate with, I can make just about any client work, to at a minimum get them 5 podcasts, which is more than enough for SEO purposes and content to repurpose and some credibility building and that sort of thing.
Spencer, Matt and I come from a world where when you had a new product or fund or real estate, you had to go on a roadshow. And the more people you greeted, the more hands you shook, the odds are the more deals you would do. But this medium allows people from the comfort of their living room or den to do the very same thing without the jet lag. You may be at the precipice of a really precious service in helping people promote whatever their product may be. I mean, walk us through some success stories and some case studies with promoting books and products through podcasts.
Yeah, I mean, I've done book tours for people where, they were on anywhere from 25 to 50 podcasts leading up to the release of their book. And, it's always hard to say what is actually quantifiable from each individual interview unless you really put in the effort to build that infrastructure. But, I do know one of those books recently went to #1 on Amazon. And, I've also had clients that, I had one client that did, I want to say it was 15 podcasts before he actually had someone specifically say, I heard you on the podcast. That's not to say there weren't others that came in. They knew there were, they just weren't really set up to quantify it that way. But on that 15th podcast, they had $85,000 in initial legal fees come in from 4 high-level clients. And so assuming they continue with that, I mean, the lifetime value of that is massive, way more than what the podcast time took. I even had a client who has an investment opportunity, and the podcast host said, we're not releasing your episode until you do a deal with us. And so they put up the money. I think it was something like 80% for him to go out and buy a deal that they owned. He put in his 20%, but I believe that deal was $8 million. So they put up, what was that, $7.4 million? And, that was a capital raise essentially that he got from one podcast, from the host of a podcast interview. And then obviously plenty of people just, they have maybe a smaller service or a financial planner or a CPA, and they obviously are able to get leads coming in from, just doing podcasts once a month, twice a month, every other month, just having it as a part of their marketing campaign.
I think it makes it easier to build relationships with people, not only just the audience, but me and Luigi have set up businesses and invested in other companies and from people that have just been on our podcast, right, as a guest. And we carry those relationships forward today. And I think building the relationship with the guest and building the rapport, the audience actually builds rapport with you and trust with you as well. So it makes that barrier to entry a lot less overall.
Absolutely. And I do, the question people always have for me, especially if they don't understand what podcasting is what's my ROI going to be? What can I expect out of this? I'm like, this isn't a lead gen service. I have no control over what you say or who is actually listening or if they need your product at that time. But let's just set aside the SEO you get from it and the content you get to repurpose. If nothing else, you walk away with a 45-minute meeting, one-on-one with a host, or two-on-one in this case, that was like a potential referral source, and with somebody within your industry, or they are, parallel to your industry. Otherwise, you shouldn't be on the show. If there's not some way that you kind of fit into what they do, they're not going to have you. But if you do, then that's someone that can be a fantastic referral source, but they're also putting you on their platform.
Spencer, I am so glad you just said that and explained that so well, because the podcast, the return on investment is not quantifiable.
I always say it's not quantifiable until it's quantifiable.
Quantifiable. However, there's branding there, and you're selling your message, right? You are your brand spokesperson, right? So it's out there, but you can't quantify it. You can't say, I invested X dollars in this podcast, I have a 4X return. So if you're going into the podcast business because you're an electrician in Oshkosh and saying, I need 5 more clients because I'm doing a podcast, it's not going to happen. It's the classic, you have to educate, and then hopefully they reach its rewards.
Absolutely.
It also allows you to showcase that you are an expert without actually saying you're an expert, because anybody that says they're an expert usually isn't, in my book, if you have to use those words. But I mean, the audience just listening in, they can tell, right? You could tell when you're having a conversation with somebody if they're real or they're not real. Now, Spencer, going back to your company, Outlier, how many clients have you picked up since 2003? How many shows have they been on?
Okay, you just said 2003. I started.
Sorry,
2020.
Sorry, the last 3 years I meant to say.
Yeah. In the last 3 years, I've had over 100 clients, and I've booked over 800 interviews for those clients. And so, some people they want to just do 5, and that's great for their SEO and their small business. And other people understand that this is something that they need to be doing all the time or regularly.
Now, when a client comes and they engage you, do you have a series of questions? You ask them who their ideal customer is, and then you say what podcast they can be on, or they give you a list of dream podcasts they'd love to be on?
There's always people that want to give me a list of, they go find a list of top 200 podcasts, and they deliver that to me. And obviously I want to be able to present them to whoever they want to be with. But what I think is important for a lot of people to understand is there's thousands of niches and hundreds of shows for every niche. And actually, that's not true. The dog grooming niche of podcasts, there's about 20 shows, and like 5 of them are defunct. But that's to say there's a niche for everything. It's not always, let's just say someone is a CPA, unless you have a very specific view or strategy or niche, it's hard to get on every finance podcast as a CPA. There's lots of CPAs, but maybe you hit the right parenting podcast in January, and they are like, you know what? I'd love to have a CPA on to talk about what are some of the write-offs that parents are missing when they're doing their taxes each year, or maybe what can they do to bring down, their reportable income a little bit. And that's not a finance show at all. That's a parenting show. But I'm sure there are lots of parenting shows out there that would take something like that. And so, yeah, I love to find out what is your ideal client, because I can then cater to that direction. Or sometimes someone has a specific product, a physical product, and the idea is not to be on podcasts to sell. So I really like to work with them. Like, well, how did you get here? What is your goal? Like, what is your special sauce as an entrepreneur? And then I sell them to entrepreneur shows through that. And I sometimes have to take it from a different angle, but every now and then, there's some people that it's clear what their niche is and who their customer is, and other times you got to work it a little bit.
So you help them create the story around them to give the pitch to the podcast that you're going to try to get them booked upon.
Yeah, I never pitch people saying my guest can talk about marketing or entrepreneurship or sales. It's like if you're on any a podcast in any of those areas, everybody can talk about that. It's what's unique that you can bring. What's your unique value proposition? What's the story you have and how you got into it that maybe differs you from other people in that space?
Spencer, business evolves. It's always changing. Medias are always changing. But in the 70s, if you were a reputable business, you needed a fax machine. In the 90s, you needed a website. If you didn't have a website, you didn't exist. If you're in business today, does that business owner or some affiliate need a podcast?
They need, I mean, if they know how to actually monetize and use it as a funnel, then I would say yes. But you know, not everyone is going to be committed to it. You could force an owner to have a podcast, but if he sounds miserable on every show, then it's not worth it. But the way I look at it is, some people, you know, everyone wants to look at the success of a podcast based on how many people are listening to it. But let's say you're a mom and pop shop and you have 100 customers a year. You know, maybe your product isn't $50 profit, but maybe it's several hundred, several thousand. 100 customers a year could set you up. You know, that's all you need for the year to make what you want to make. It's so easy to get 100 people to listen to your podcast, because the distribution channels and putting out good content and having guests that promote it to their audience. Any podcast that has a dedicated 100 to 250 or 500 people always listening to them, they're building that same rapport and community that, you know, we're talking about the guest gets out of it. The difference is when you're the podcast host, you get to drive the conversation how you want based on what's happening in your industry at that time. You know, right now, people are giving interviews about Fed rates that are going to be outdated when the podcast comes out in 3 months. But if you're the host of a podcast, you know, you can decide to put that out. I need to put that out today. I need to put that out in the next 3 days before things change in the economy.
Now, Spencer, if you are dealing with a client, let's say it's his first time doing a guest appearance on a podcast, and maybe he's a little nervous, he's getting the clammy fingers. What are some of the tips you give to newbies in the podcast guest world?
Off the bat, I want people to understand just what not to do. You know, try to make sure you don't have a dog barking in your room with you, you know, but it's little things like that. But I think that the uhs and ums and like and needing to pause, I think that makes it very unique. It doesn't make it sound like it's super polished. But as long as the person is talking about something they have knowledge on or they're passionate about, they're going to kind of get into a flow. You know, it's not like being in front of, it's not like speaking in front of a room. I'm just speaking to you two. Now, there's going to be thousands of people that hear it, but it's just the two of us. And so even if someone is, say, an introvert, you know, an introvert can have a one-on-one conversation just fine. And so this is why it's a great medium for just about anybody, because you know, there are definitely people that have nerves get in the way. They could be the most, you know, informative person in their sphere, but if they get nervous when they get on stage in front of 1,000 people, it's not going to come out great. But as long as you can have a one-on-one conversation, you're there. And so I really just like people to understand, like, just go be you and talk about what you do and provide value. That's it. Just go provide value. And it's going to talk about your story. Like, you don't need to practice what your background is. Your background is literally just the life you lived. So just talk about it.
So Spencer, I got a question for you. It's a little bit self-serving, right? So to figure out what your podcast downloads are, it's kind of a mystery to everybody across the board. So do you have any tools or any softwares that you use to see what the downloads are on a show before you book somebody?
Yeah, I've heard that. Like, I use the 5-star reviews as an indicator. Just because it's the public one. But I don't know if you guys have ever had to go and get Google reviews for your business. But I have a photo booth rental business on the side. All of my best friends are entrepreneurs, and I still couldn't get them to leave me a review unless I Venmo'd them $10 at that moment to go do it. And even then, only half of them did it. So I look at that, I'm like, okay, if a show has 1 review, that means they have at least 10 listeners. But I'll go to, like, you know, there are some paid services that are more for people like me called Podcast Wise. That gives an estimate. And I've heard people say their downloads falls into that estimate. But that estimate could be 90,000 to 160,000 monthly listeners. I'm like, okay, even if you're at 90,000, that's fantastic, but you have a delta of 70,000. Like, that's a pretty big range. And so what I think people should really understand is, like, let's look at the lowest end. Let's say you're going to do 5 podcasts and each one only has 100 listeners. Well, you got in front of 500 people. If you had the opportunity to speak to 500 people in person, would you take it? Usually the answer is yes. They'd have to create a presentation. They'd have to fly somewhere, get a hotel, or whatever it might be. Here, you have to put in more time because you're doing 5 interviews. But you don't have to make the presentation. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to get an expense report approved or anything like that. You just go do it.
Yeah.
Hey guys, don't tell anybody, but these ratings are kind of fudged. You know, when they used to do the Nielsen ratings for TV, they would forecast based upon 200 people called. And you're basing the national advertising budget for a company based upon 200 phone calls. It's insanity. So the metrics are loosey-goosey, but you are right, Spencer, because certain podcasts and certain mediums have let's call them like a certain energy, right? You know that that's the energy that you want your guests to take part in because it's within that niche.
Mm-hmm.
So Spencer, I'll tell you something funny. So Luigi was going on this honeymoon to Italy last year. Right, he was boarding the plane and somebody goes, "Hey, you're Luigi from the Liquid Lunch Project."
Swear to God.
That is amazing.
My wife only gave like $20 to do that.
I
Yeah, I don't think my wife's ever listened to one episode, so that's pretty funny. She would.
Well, you know, one of the things that really made me passionate about this idea when I had it was that I had been listening to like a crypto podcast for, I think, like a year. And I found the host tweeted that he was in Philadelphia. And I said, I'm in Philadelphia. I messaged him and I was like, hey, do you want to go get dinner? And he said yes. And so I'm meeting him for the first time. And I just started a new job. I was kind of like giving him an update on my life and like, oh yeah, I used to do this. And he would be like, no, dude, I don't know you. Like, I don't know what you used to do. And I had to keep stopping myself to be like, no, this guy doesn't know who I am. I know everything about him. I know what he's invested in. I know about the time he spent living in China. I know, about some terrible things that happened to his family because he was open about it on the podcast. He knows nothing about me. And that really made me understand the trust you build with listeners as a podcast host and that they get to know you.
Yeah, it is crazy. I was actually at an event the last couple of days and people coming up to me and I guess from posting on social media about listening to my podcast, like, oh, how's this doing? How's X, Y, and Z? I'm like, I'm Matt. Hi, nice to meet you. But yeah, they're like, we know who you are. But you definitely, and I guess I could see it too with some of the things that I listen to. Kind of feel like you know the host, like you know them intimately a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's a little scary too, right? Scary, not for us. We're not that big, but I guess some of these well-known podcasters,
Well,
they definitely have
it's
some
like
stalkers.
even if they're not going to talk about their wife and kids, there's going to be a time they're like, I'm getting over COVID right now. I'm having this really bad cough, and then 3 weeks later, they're still mentioning they got this long cough or something like that. That's just something. It's like the listener is like, can recall that, let's just say they meet them later. Like, how's that cough doing? You're like, how'd you know I have a cough?
So Spencer, what's next? So you launched this, you're doing amazing. Are you guys just getting people booked? Are you helping them with marketing material, post-production stuff? Where are you doing that now? Do you plan on doing that? And where do you see your company evolving to?
Yeah, so we do help people launch and distribute podcasts. My girlfriend was also in the music industry, and so she was able to jump into editing and distribution and making graphics and stuff like that. But I'm not a marketing expert, and I actually find marketing very boring. Like, I understand how like exciting it is for some people, but it's not for me. And so like I don't take on those tasks, but I do have strategic partnerships with people that can say, if you're on 15 podcasts, they can take those 15 podcasts that I booked and turn that into a ton of content that you can now repurpose on LinkedIn, your email list, and Instagram and Facebook and all of that stuff. I also obviously have connections with plenty of people in social media marketing and publicity and other types of things. And so I kind of just create these strategic partnerships that I can, give to people if they're interested in doing other things. But, I know where my skill set is and what I'm passionate about, and that's getting people great podcast interviews. And so there could definitely be a time where I try to grow this into more than a one-man show, but I know that the few companies out there that do this, I look at who the other agents are, and they look to me like people that they're younger, they wanted a remote job. It's something that, anybody can do what I do. But the difference is I was in talent representation for 15 years. And so I think that gives me a little bit of an edge. And so I like I'm the guy, I don't siphon this off to VAs like some people do that are not at the Podmatch and Podfest and podcast movement. I'm out there networking and making new connections all the time that I can bring to my clients.
Well, that's extremely valuable, especially for a show like ours. We get, 15 to 25 different people that want to be a guest every single day. We're getting 15 to 25 emails. But we book your guests because we know the guests that you bring to us, they're quality, number one. And the only reason we say yes all the time is because we gave you a shot. We have a relationship. So if anybody listening wants to get on podcasts, go out and find people that can help you, that already have relationships like Outlier Audio, that can get you on the shows that you want to get on, right? Because 90% of the emails that come in, we don't even think about.
Yeah, I really try to make sure that, and this is something that anybody that wants to just try podcast, there are things out there like Podmatch. You can go and make a profile. They kind of walk you through it with the outline where it tells you where to put your links and your bio and your headshot and stuff like that. And that's a great start for anybody that wants to get going with it. But I've really built this to be, if you don't have the time or that it's just not in your wheelhouse to handle that, I can come and do it for you. And I really like to be able to I also do my best to make it easy for the host so that you can just say yes. I don't start off every pitch with like, so-and-so is a proud father of 3 and loves his dog and lives in Charlotte, North Carolina. Like none of those things help in getting you booked on a podcast. Every email starts with, I'm reaching out about so-and-so to be on the Liquid Lunch podcast to discuss. And I lead with the 2 to 3 most interesting topics they have that are going to bring the most value that the listeners have not already heard, or at least a new perspective on things that they might have already heard and need to be reaffirmed. There are lots of people that can speak about systems and scalability. And it's something that any business show should talk about every 2 to 3 months, but it's not easy to force it. This week, we're going to talk about scalability again. It's like, no, this person has a new view on scalability that we haven't discussed before. And so that's what I work with my clients to really understand is what's the unique value proposition they can bring to the host. So that makes it easy for you to say yes.
And we appreciate that about you. Spencer, can you tell everybody how they can get in touch with you if they're thinking about taking this leap and getting on to us?
Absolutely. You can just go to outlieraudio.com. You can reach out to me at spencer@outlieraudio.com. My Instagram is just my name, Spencer Carpenter. The Instagram for the business is Outlier Audio, and I'm on LinkedIn as well.
Spencer, thanks so much for being here, my man. We really appreciate you and all the great guests that you send to us. But I do have one question for you before I let you run. What is your favorite podcast of all time? Favorite podcast, definitely Bigger Pockets. It put me on the trajectory I'm at. It taught me a lot. I've heard from lots of great people. Coming into this space, that was the number one interview I wanted to get someone is Bigger Pockets. Love that. Guys, that's a wrap of the Liquid Lunch Project. We'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to the show. And make sure you subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend. We'll see you on the next episode of the Liquid Lunch Project.